poor widow shared her food with a stranger. The next morning she woke up to a fortune. Grace lived at the edge of a quiet village in a house that looked as worn out as the life she led. The walls were cracked and faded. The roof leaked during every rainstorm, and the single room inside was barely enough to call a home. Outside, a small patch of land served as her garden, where she grew a handful of vegetables. The mornings always began early for Grace. Even before the first rays of sunlight touched the village, she was awake. Her hands, rough from years of labor, moved with a steady rhythm as she watered the plants and checked each leaf for pests. It was a simple task, but one she did with care, for this garden was her lifeline. Life hadn't always been so hard for Grace. There was a time when her laughter filled the house, when she woke up each day to the warm voice of her husband, Ramesh. He had been a carpenter, skilled with his hands and full of dreams. Together they had plans for a better future, a small workshop where Ramesh could create beautiful furniture and enough savings to send their son, Daniel, to a good school. Their days were filled with hope and hard work, and their evenings with quiet moments as a family. Grace often recalled the way Ramesh would hum while working on a piece of wood, his hands moving with precision, his eyes focused. He was her anchor, her partner in every sense of the word. But life had its own plans. 5 years ago, Ramesh fell ill. It started as a simple fever, something they thought would pass, but the fever lingered, growing worse with each passing day. Grace spent sleepless nights by his side, feeding him soup, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, and praying with all her heart. They had no money for a doctor, no savings to buy medicine. The villagers offered what little help they could. Some brought herbs, others offered prayers, but none of it was enough. One cold morning, as the first light of dawn crept into the room, Ramesh took his last breath. Grace held his hand, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. The days after Ramesh's death were a blur of grief and struggle. Grace was left alone to care for their son, Daniel, who was just 13 at the time. She took on every job she could find, washing clothes, cleaning houses, and selling vegetables from her garden. Each coin she earned went towards food and school fees for Daniel. The work was hard, but Grace never complained. Daniel was her reason to keep going, her hope for a better future. As the years passed, Daniel grew into a young man full of ambition. He was determined to change their lives, to give his mother the comfort she deserved. On his 18th birthday, he told Grace of his plan to go to the city. "Ma," he said, his eyes shining with determination, "I will find work there. I will send money back to you. And one day, I will bring you to live with me in a big house." Grace's heart ached at the thought of him leaving, but she knew he was doing it for her. She packed a small bag for him, filling it with clothes, food, and all her love. "Be careful, Daniel," she whispered as she hugged him goodbye. "And don't forget to write." At first, Daniel kept his promise. Letters arrived every few weeks, filled with stories of the bustling city and his hard work. Grace read each one over and over, her heart swelling with pride. But as time went on, the letters became less frequent. Then, they stopped altogether. Grace waited by the door each day, hoping for news, but none came. The silence was like a heavy weight on her chest. She told herself that Daniel must be busy, that he was working hard to fulfill his promise. But deep down, worry gnawed at her. What if something had happened to him? What if he was in trouble? Grace's days became a cycle of work and waiting. She spent her mornings in the garden, her afternoons selling vegetables at the market, and her evenings mending clothes by the dim light of an oil lamp. Her home was quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds or the rustle of leaves in the wind. The loneliness was her constant companion, but she bore it with quiet strength. In her cupboard, she kept a small clay jar where she saved whatever coins she could spare. It wasn't much, but it was her hope. One day, when she had enough, she would go to the city to find Daniel. The villagers admired Grace for her kindness and resilience. Despite her hardships, she was always ready to help others. If a neighbor was short on food, Grace shared from her own kitchen. If someone needed an extra pair of hands, she offered her time. Even stray animals found comfort in her presence, as she often left scraps of food for them outside her house. Grace believed in the power of kindness. "What you give to the world comes back to you," she often said to herself. But her kindness also made her vulnerable. Some people took advantage of her generosity, borrowing money or goods and never returning them. Still, Grace refused to let bitterness take root in her heart. On some nights, as she sat alone by the flickering light of her oil lamp, Grace allowed herself to feel the weight of her sadness. She missed Ramesh's laughter, Daniel's chatter, and the warmth of a full house. She wondered why life had been so unkind to her, why she was left to carry so much pain. Sometimes she felt angry at fate, at the world, at herself for not being able to change her circumstances. But she quickly pushed those feelings away. I have to stay strong, she told herself. Better days will come. One evening, as rain poured down outside, Grace sat by the small window of her house. The sound of the raindrops hitting the roof was soothing, a rare comfort in her otherwise difficult life. She was counting the coins in her clay jar, wondering how long it would take to save enough for a trip to the city. Suddenly, she heard a sound footsteps, faint but clear, coming from outside. She froze, her heart pounding. It was unusual for anyone to be out in such heavy rain. She looked through the window but saw no one. Her mind raced with questions. Was it a traveler seeking shelter? A thief? Or just her imagination playing tricks on her? The footsteps stopped, leaving an eerie silence. Grace shook her head, trying to dismiss her unease. It's nothing, she told herself. Probably just an animal. But the feeling of unease lingered, a strange sensation that something was about to change. As she returned to her work, she couldn't shake off the thought of those footsteps. For the first time in years, the predictable rhythm of her life felt disrupted. The rain continued to fall, and the world outside seemed darker than usual. Grace didn't know it yet, but this night would mark the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would change her life forever. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the earth damp and the air crisp with the scent of wet soil. Grace woke to the familiar sound of birds chirping outside her small, broken window. She stretched her tired limbs and got out of bed, ready to face another ordinary day. But as she opened her front door to collect the vegetables she left outside the night before, she noticed something unusual. A man sat slumped on the small wooden bench near her garden. His clothes were soaked and torn, his hair disheveled. He looked weak, as though he hadn't eaten in days. Grace hesitated for a moment. The sight of a stranger at her doorstep made her uneasy, but the man looked harmless, more like someone in desperate need than a threat. She stepped closer, calling out gently, "Are you all right?" The man slowly lifted his head. His face was pale, and his eyes were hollow with exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to intrude. I had nowhere else to go." Grace's heart softened. The village wasn't a place where strangers were often seen, and it was rare for anyone to show up unannounced. But she couldn't bring herself to turn him away. "You look hungry," she said, trying to sound calm despite the unease growing in her chest. "Come inside. I'll make you something to eat." The man nodded, his movements slow and weak. Grace helped him to his feet, noticing how cold and frail he felt. She led him into her home and offered him a seat near the small cooking stove. The man's eyes wandered around the room, taking in the simplicity of her home. "Thank you," he murmured. Grace quickly prepared a bowl of rice and lentils, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man? Where had he come from? Why was he here? She watched him as he ate, noticing how he tried to eat slowly, though it was clear he was starving. After a few moments of silence, she couldn't hold back her curiosity any longer. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Why are you out here in the village?" The man paused, lowering his spoon. His expression grew distant, as though he was remembering something painful. I've lost everything," he said finally. "I was traveling to find work, but I was robbed along the way. They took my money, my belongings, everything. I've been wandering for days with nowhere to go." Grace felt a pang of sympathy. His story wasn't so different from her own struggles, losing what you had, trying to survive with nothing. "You're safe here," she said, her voice firm. "Stay until you regain your strength." The man looked at her with gratitude, but Grace noticed something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear or sadness, but a kind of heaviness, as though he carried a secret he couldn't share. She decided not to press him further. He was a stranger, and while her heart told her to trust him, her mind reminded her to be cautious. Over the next few days, Grace let the man stay in her home. He introduced himself as Ethan, a name that felt ordinary, yet carried a sense of mystery when he said it. Ethan helped around the house, fixing the broken leg of her wooden table and mending the garden fence. He was polite and quiet, never asking for more than she offered. But Grace couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he let on. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ethan finally broke his silence. "You're very kind," he said, his voice low. "Most people wouldn't do what you've done for me." Grace smiled faintly. "I've had my share of struggles," she replied. "I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn." Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Do you ever wonder if things happen for a reason?" he asked. Grace thought for a moment. "I do," she said. "I believe in karma, that what you give to the world comes back to you. It's why I try to help others, even when I have so little myself." Ethan looked at her, his gaze intense. "You've given me more than just shelter," he said softly. "You've given me hope." The words caught Grace off guard. She wasn't used to such open gratitude, and it made her feel both proud and uneasy. She wanted to believe in the good she was doing, but a small voice in her mind warned her not to let her guard down. The next morning, Grace woke to find Ethan gone. Panic surged through her as she checked every corner of her small home. The clay jar with her savings was still in its place, untouched. The relief she felt was quickly replaced by confusion. Why had he left without saying goodbye? Had something frightened him? Or had he simply decided it was time to move on? But as she stepped outside to water her garden, Grace noticed something strange. A small pouch sat on the bench where she had first found Ethan. Inside was a handful of coins, far more than she had ever saved in her jar. Beside the pouch was a folded piece of paper with a single sentence written on it. "Thank you for your kindness. It will not be forgotten." Grace stared at the note, her mind racing. Where had Ethan gotten the money? Why had he left it for her? And what did he mean by, "It will not be forgotten"? The questions swirled in her mind, filling her with a mix of gratitude, confusion, and unease. She tucked the pouch and the note away, deciding not to tell anyone in the village about Ethan. It felt too personal, too strange to share. But as the days turned into weeks, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something much larger, a turning point in her life that she had yet to fully understand. Life had a way of surprising Grace when she least expected it. A week after Ethan's mysterious departure, she found herself at the market, selling her vegetables as usual. The morning sun bathed the bustling square in golden light, and the chatter of villagers filled the air. Grace had set up her small stall, neatly arranging the tomatoes, okra, and brinjals she had harvested that morning. She greeted her customers with a polite smile, though her mind remained distracted by thoughts of Ethan and the pouch of coins he had left behind. It was in the midst of this usual routine that Grace met Sophia, a young woman who seemed out of place in the village. Sophia wore a bright scarf and carried herself with an air of confidence that Grace couldn't help but notice. Her face was marked by a kind of weariness, as if life had shown her both its beauty and its cruelty in equal measure. She approached Grace's stall, inspecting the vegetables with care. "These are fresh," Sophia remarked, her voice warm but firm. "You must work hard to keep them this good." Grace nodded, her fingers brushing against the dirt-streaked basket. "It's not easy, but it keeps me going." Sophia smiled and picked out a few tomatoes, placing them in her basket. "You remind me of my mother," she said suddenly. "She was just like you, strong, determined, and kind. She always said that women like us don't just survive, we endure." The words struck a chord with Grace. "It's the only way to live," she replied softly. As Sophia paid for her vegetables, she leaned in closer. "I'm new to this village," she said, trying to start fresh. "If you ever need help or company, come find me." Grace watched as Sophia walked away, her colorful scarf fluttering in the breeze. There was something intriguing about her, an energy that was both comforting and unsettling. Grace decided she would keep an open mind about the newcomer, though she wasn't sure how much she could trust her yet. Later that week, as Grace carried her vegetables to the market again, she encountered another stranger, a man named Victor. Unlike Ethan or Sophia, Victor was loud and full of bravado. He was a traveling merchant who had set up a stall across from Grace's, selling trinkets, spices, and fabric. His booming voice and exaggerated sales pitch drew a crowd, making it difficult for Grace to sell her vegetables. At first, Grace felt irritated by Victor's presence. His customers spilled over into her space, and his constant chatter was distracting. But as the days went on, she noticed something surprising. Victor wasn't just a merchant, he was a storyteller. Between sales, he would weave tales of far-off lands, daring adventures, and strange encounters. His stories captivated the villagers, who often lingered long after making their purchases. Curious, Grace approached Victor one evening after the market had emptied. "Your stories," she began hesitantly. "Are they real?" Victor grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Ah, that's the magic of a good tale," he replied. "It doesn't matter if it's real or not. What matters is how it makes you feel." Grace found herself drawn to Victor's charisma, though she remained wary of his motives. He was the kind of man who seemed to have a hidden agenda, always watching and calculating. Still, his presence brought a new dynamic to her otherwise monotonous life, and she couldn't help but wonder what role he might play in the strange twists her days had recently taken. One evening, as Grace was returning home, she found Sophia waiting by her gate. The young woman held a small bundle wrapped in cloth, her expression tense. "I need your help," Sophia said, her voice urgent. Grace invited her inside, her curiosity piqued. Once they were seated, Sophia unwrapped the bundle, revealing a worn-out journal. "This belonged to my father," Sophia explained. "He passed away recently, and I've been trying to piece together his life. There are entries about this village, about people he knew here, but some pages are missing, and I can't make sense of it." Grace glanced at the journal, her fingers grazing its frayed edges. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly, "I think you might know something. Your name is mentioned in one of the entries." The revelation sent a shiver down Grace's spine. She had never met Sophia's father, as far as she knew, yet the idea that she could somehow be connected to this mysterious puzzle was unsettling. "What does it say?" she asked cautiously. Sophia hesitated, then opened the journal to a specific page. The handwriting was messy but legible, and the words sent a chill through Grace's veins. Asterisk, Grace is the key. She will understand when the time comes. Asterisk. Grace stared at the words, her mind racing. What could it mean? How was she connected to this man she had never known? The questions filled her with both dread and curiosity. "I don't understand," she admitted. "This doesn't make any sense." Sophia placed a hand on Grace's arm. "Maybe it will, in time," she said. "I just thought you should know." The days that followed were anything but ordinary. Grace found herself caught between the new relationships she was forming and the lingering mysteries they brought into her life. Victor, with his stories and charm, began to hint at knowledge of things he couldn't possibly know, details about Ethan, about the pouch of coins, and even about Grace's past. His cryptic remarks left her feeling both intrigued and uneasy. At the same time, Sophia became a regular visitor, sharing more pieces of her father's journal and asking questions that Grace couldn't answer. The two women formed a bond, but their interactions were often tinged with tension. Grace couldn't help but feel that Sophia was hiding something, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The biggest twist came one afternoon when Victor approached Grace with a proposition. "You're a kind woman, Grace," he said, his voice unusually serious. "But kindness alone won't solve your problems. There's a way to change your fortune if you're willing to take a risk." "What kind of risk?" Grace asked, her heart pounding. Victor leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a man in the next town over," he said. "He deals in opportunities. If you're brave enough to meet him, he might have something that could change your life." Grace felt a surge of skepticism. "Why are you telling me this?" she demanded. "What do you get out of it?" Victor chuckled, his grin returning. "Let's just say I enjoy seeing stories unfold," he replied, "and yours is shaping up to be a very interesting one." That night, as Grace sat alone in her small house, she found herself at a crossroads. The connection she had made with Sophia, Victor, and even Ethan had brought new complications into her life. The questions surrounding the pouch of coins, the journal, and Victor's mysterious offer weighed heavily on her mind. Grace knew that whatever lay ahead would challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But one thing was certain: her quiet, predictable life was no longer her own. The pieces of a larger puzzle were falling into place, and she was determined to find out where they led, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. The days in Grace's village passed slowly, yet her mind raced endlessly. Every interaction with Victor and Sophia deepened the mystery of Ethan's gift and the journal's cryptic messages. Each night, she would sit on her porch, staring at the pouch of coins, running her fingers over the strange symbols, and wondering what her role in this strange tale might be. One morning, just as the first rays of light peeked over the horizon, there was an urgent knock at her door. Grace's heart leaped. Visitors at such an early hour were unusual. When she opened the door, she found Sophia standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Grace," Sophia gasped, clutching a folded piece of paper in her trembling hands. I found this under my door this morning." Grace took the paper, unfolded it, and read the hastily scrawled words. "You are too close. Stop digging, or there will be consequences." Grace felt her stomach tighten. Who would send something like this? Sophia shook her head. "I don't know, but what if it's connected to the journal? To everything we've been uncovering?" Grace looked at the young woman standing before her, her hands gripping the doorframe for support. She saw a flicker of fear in Sophia's eyes, but also determination. They were too far into this mystery to turn back now. "We can't let this stop us," Grace said firmly, folding the note and slipping it into her pocket. "If anything, it means we're getting close to the truth." Later that day, Grace sought out Victor at the market. He was standing by his colorful stall, entertaining a small crowd with one of his elaborate tales. When he saw Grace approaching, he cut his story short and stepped away from the group. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Victor said with a grin, though his eyes quickly grew serious as he took in her expression. "What's happened?" Grace showed him the note. Victor read it carefully, his face darkening as he reached the end. "This isn't good," he said, his usual jovial tone replaced with something more somber. "Whoever sent this doesn't want you finding out the truth." "Do you know who it could be?" Grace asked. Victor hesitated, then shook his head. "I have my suspicions, but nothing I can prove. Whoever it is, they're clearly watching you." The thought sent a chill down Grace's spine. She glanced around the busy market, suddenly hyper-aware of the faces around her. How many of them were innocent villagers, and how many might be keeping an eye on her every move? "We need to be careful," Victor continued, "but we can't stop now. There's too much at stake." That evening, Grace, Sophia, and Victor gathered at Grace's house to discuss their next steps. Sophia had brought the journal, as well as a small collection of other papers she'd found in her late father's belongings. Among them was a map, its edges frayed, and its surface covered in markings that looked eerily similar to the symbols on Ethan's coins. "This map," Sophia explained, pointing to a faint circle drawn near the edge, "leads to a place my father called the clearing. He mentioned it several times in his journal, but I never understood why it was important." Grace studied the map, her fingers tracing the circle. "Do you think this place has something to do with the coins?" "Maybe," Sophia said. "Or maybe it's where we'll find the answers we've been looking for." Victor leaned over the table, his sharp eyes scanning the map. "If we're going to follow this, we'll need to move quickly. Whoever sent that note won't just sit back and let us uncover their secrets." Grace felt a knot form in her stomach. The idea of venturing into the unknown with the threat of danger looming over them was terrifying, but she also knew she couldn't back down now. Too many pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and she was determined to see the picture it would reveal. The journey to the clearing began at dawn the next day. Grace, Sophia, and Victor set out with nothing but the map, a few supplies, and a shared sense of purpose. The path led them deep into the forest, where the trees grew thick and the air felt heavy with an unexplainable tension. As they walked, Victor kept the mood light with his stories and jokes, but Grace could sense the unease beneath his cheerful facade. Sophia, meanwhile, was quiet, her eyes scanning the forest, as though she expected someone or something to jump out at any moment. After hours of walking, they finally arrived at the clearing. It was a wide, open space surrounded by towering trees, with a single stone structure standing at its center. The structure was simple yet imposing, with its weathered surface covered in the same strange symbols that adorned the coins. "This is it," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is what my father wrote about." As they approached the structure, Grace felt a strange energy in the air. It was as though the clearing itself was alive, watching them. waiting for something. Victor stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he examined the symbols. These markings, they're a kind of code. If we can figure out how to read them, we might find what we're looking for. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out Ethan's coins. She held them up to the light, studying the symbols more closely. Then, almost instinctively, she began to arrange the coins on the surface of the structure, matching them to the corresponding symbols. As the final coin clicked into place, a low rumble echoed through the clearing. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, and the stone structure began to glow faintly. "What's happening?" Sophia asked, her voice filled with awe and fear. Before anyone could answer, the structure began to open, revealing a hidden chamber beneath. Inside was a small chest, its surface intricately carved with more of the strange symbols. Victor stepped forward, his hands hovering over the chest. "This is it," he said softly. "The answers we've been searching for." But as he reached for the chest, a voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Stop right there." The group turned to see a man stepping into the clearing, flanked by two others. He was tall and imposing, with a face that seemed carved from stone. Grace recognized him immediately. It was Dominic, the wealthiest and most feared man in the neighboring village. "What are you doing here?" Grace demanded, her voice trembling. Dominic smirked. "I could ask you the same thing, but I already know the answer. You're meddling in things you don't understand." "This has nothing to do with you," Victor said, stepping protectively in front of Grace and Sophia. Dominic laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Oh, but it has everything to do with me. That chest belongs to my family, and I'm here to make sure it stays that way." Grace felt her heart pound in her chest. "Why would Ethan give me the coins if this belonged to you?" Dominic's expression darkened. "Ethan was a fool. He thought he could defy me, hide the truth, but he was wrong. And now, you're about to pay the price for his mistakes." As Dominic and his men stepped closer, Grace knew they were out of options. The truth was within reach, but so was danger. It was a moment of decision, a test of courage and conviction. And Grace realized she had no choice but to fight for what she believed in. The clearing grew quieter as the sun began to dip below the trees, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Grace remained seated on the chest after Dominic had left, her hands clutching the old letter from Ethan. She felt a whirlwind of emotions, relief that the immediate danger was over, grief for her old friend, and a profound sense of responsibility. The words Ethan had written echoed in her mind. Asterix, "This legacy belongs to the people." Asterix. Victor and Sophia stayed silent, giving her a moment to absorb the weight of everything. Sophia finally spoke, her voice soft but determined. "Grace, what do we do now? The treasure. It could change everything, but it could also bring more trouble." Grace looked at Sophia, and then at Victor, her heart heavy but clear. "We'll do what Ethan would have wanted. We'll use it for the good of everyone, not just ourselves." Victor nodded. "Then we need a plan. If word gets out too quickly, people like Dominic will come back for it. We have to be careful." Grace folded Ethan's letter carefully and placed it back into the chest. She stood, her resolve steady. "We'll start small, help those who need it the most quietly. We'll protect this treasure while making sure it fulfills its purpose." The days that followed were busy. Grace, Sophia, and Victor worked tirelessly to decide how to begin using the treasure. They started by focusing on the most urgent needs in the village. The old school, where children sat on broken benches and learned under a leaking roof, was their first project. Victor, with his natural charm and knack for storytelling, rallied a few trusted villagers to help with the repairs. Using the gold coins from the chest, they bought supplies and hired skilled workers from nearby towns, all while keeping the source of their funds a secret. Grace often visited the school as repairs were underway. Watching the children's excitement as they peeked into the construction site filled her with hope. She remembered the days when her own son, Rowan, had attended the school before his untimely passing. It felt like a part of him was still present, cheering her on in her mission. Sophia, meanwhile, took charge of another critical need, providing food for families who were struggling to get by. She discreetly distributed sacks of rice, lentils, and cooking oil to the poorest households. At first, some villagers were hesitant to accept help, their pride keeping them from taking charity. But Sophia's gentle approach and heartfelt words won them over. "This isn't charity," she would say. "It's a way to honor those who have always given, even when they had nothing." Despite their efforts to keep the treasure a secret, whispers began to spread. People noticed the changes, the new roof on the school, the sudden availability of food and supplies, and the quiet optimism that began to replace the despair that had long hung over the village. Grace knew it was only a matter of time before someone like Dominic tried to interfere again. One evening, as the three of them sat together discussing their progress, a knock at Grace's door startled them. Victor quickly stood, his hand resting on the small knife he carried for protection. When Grace opened the door, she found a group of villagers standing outside, their faces a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. "Is it true?" An elderly man named Hari asked, "Are you the one helping the village?" Grace hesitated, glancing back at Sophia and Victor. She could see the sincerity in the villagers' eyes and decided it was time to speak the truth. "Yes," she admitted, her voice steady, "but I'm not doing it alone. Victor, Sophia, and we've been given a gift, one that we believe should be shared with everyone." The crowd murmured among themselves, their faces lighting up with hope. Hari stepped forward, his voice trembling with emotion. "For years, we've struggled. We've lost so much, and now you've brought us a chance to rebuild. Thank you, Grace." Grace felt her eyes well up with tears. "It's not just me," she said. "It's all of us. Together, we can create a better future." The villagers began to rally around Grace and her small team, offering their skills and labor to help with various projects. The school was completed within weeks, its once crumbling walls now sturdy and painted in vibrant colors. The children's laughter echoed through the village, a sound that had been absent for far too long. With the school finished, they turned their attention to building a small clinic. Grace remembered the days when her husband had fallen ill, and there had been no medical care available nearby. She didn't want anyone else to endure the same helplessness she had felt. They hired a young nurse from a neighboring town, promising her a fair wage and a place to stay in the village. The clinic became a symbol of hope, a place where people could seek help without fear of being turned away. As their work progressed, Grace began to notice a change in herself. The woman who had once been paralyzed by grief and fear was now a leader, someone the village looked up to. She still missed her husband and son deeply, but their memories now felt like a source of strength rather than pain. She often thought of Ethan, imagining him watching over her with pride. One day, as Grace was sorting through the remaining coins and papers in the chest, Victor entered the room with a worried expression. "We have a problem," he said. "Dominic is back. He's been asking questions in the neighboring village. I think he's planning something." Grace felt her stomach drop. She had known this day would come, but had hoped for more time. "What do we do?" she asked. Victor sat down beside her. "We need to be prepared. If he comes back with men, we can't fight him off on our own. But we have the support of the village now. If we stand together, he won't be able to intimidate us." Grace nodded, her mind racing. "We'll call a meeting," she said. "We'll tell everyone the full truth about the treasure and Ethan's wishes. If Dominic tries to take it, he won't just be fighting us, he'll be fighting the entire village." The meeting took place the next evening in the village square. Grace stood before the gathered crowd, her heart pounding, but her voice steady as she recounted the story of Ethan, the coins, and the treasure's true purpose. She spoke about the dangers they faced, including Dominic's threats, and appealed to the villagers to protect what they had built together. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, one by one, the villagers stepped forward, pledging their support. Hari, the elderly man, spoke with determination. "This treasure belongs to all of us. We won't let anyone take it away." Dominic did return a few days later, but he was met with a united front. The villagers stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking his path and making it clear that he was no longer welcome. Faced with their strength and resolve, Dominic had no choice but to leave, his threats ringing hollow in the face of their solidarity. In the weeks that followed, life in the village continued to transform. Grace, Sophia, and Victor oversaw the remaining projects, ensuring that every coin from the treasure was used wisely. The once dilapidated village was now thriving, its people filled with hope and pride. One evening, as the sun set over the now bustling square, Sophia approached Grace with a small box in her hands. "I found this among my father's things," she said. "I think Ethan wanted you to have it." Grace opened the box to find a simple pendant inside, shaped like a small dove. She felt tears prick her eyes as she held it, a symbol of peace and freedom. "Thank you," she said softly. Sophia smiled. "You've earned it, Grace. You've brought us all a new beginning." As Grace looked out over the village, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every moment. She had found not only a way to honor Ethan's legacy, but also a renewed purpose in her own life. The widow, who had once shared her last piece of bread with a stranger, had become the heart of her community, a symbol of resilience and hope. And in doing so, she had discovered that the greatest fortune wasn't in the treasure itself, but in the love, unity, and strength it had brought to the people around her. As the story of Grace's journey comes to an end, we are reminded of the incredible power of kindness, courage, and community. A simple act of sharing her last meal with a stranger set off a chain of events that transformed not only Grace's life, but the lives of everyone in her village. From a grieving widow to a beacon of hope, Grace showed us that even in the face of hardship, one person's determination and compassion can spark a brighter future for many. This story is a reflection of something we all carry within us, the ability to make a difference. No matter how small our beginnings, Grace's journey teaches us that true wealth isn't found in gold or riches, but in the love, unity, and purpose we build with others. If this story inspired you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Grace's journey moved you the most? Do you believe small acts of kindness can create big changes? Let us know in the comments below. We're eager to read your insights and reflections. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video to support us in bringing you more inspiring tales. Share it with someone who could use a little hope or motivation today. It might just be the spark they need. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, filled with emotion, lessons, and unforgettable journeys. Thank you for watching and being part of this incredible community. Remember, every act of kindness has the potential to create ripples that reach far beyond what we can imagine. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the next Grace in someone's story. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the power of change. See you in the next video.